So we're in Revelation 6 again, Revelation 6. We're going to look at the second half of the chapter, verses 9 through 17. These are also known as the fifth and sixth seal judgments. And so we're going to look at Revelation 6, 9 through 17. So when I was in high school, I went through this season where I thought that the book of Revelation was just like the coolest thing. And one of the things that I really wanted was I wanted someone like Jerry Bruckheimer or Steven Spielberg or Roland Emmerich, the big action movie directors of the 90s, to make a movie about Revelation. Where all the devastation happens, and then Jesus comes in the cloud as the savior and conquering hero at the end of the film. And I used to daydream about how amazing it would be for a big enough budget to watch all those disasters and to have that grand finale of Jesus coming in with his majestic army through the clouds. And then the movie Left Behind came out, and I saw that and I thought, better just keep this in my imagination than actually have it into a movie. Maybe we don't need to watch it so much. But today, more than anything else, I kind of find myself more horrified rather than intrigued by the devastation that's going to be caused by the seal, trumpet, and bowl judgments. Last week, we talked about the massive calamities, the terrible death counts that will occur at the first four seal judgments alone, and it's just absolute horror, and I would not want to watch that movie. And looking at all this stuff, it makes a lot of Christians say, well, Sean, if you want to watch this in the movie, I don't even want to read about this in my Bible. And how can we say that God is loving and gracious and slow to anger, yet at the same time believe in these seal judgments? I mean, the very phrase for our title this morning, the wrath of the Lamb, that kind of has some disturbing elements to it. Because, I mean, if you think about a lamb, how should you picture a lamb? Gentle, peaceful, just about the most adorably cute animal in the entire world. And then to read about the wrath of the Lamb, it just has a really disturbing twist to look at it. And this has led a lot of people to then look at Revelation and to say that, well, it probably means all of these judgments are just allegory. These probably aren't going to happen. It's led other people to say that this is just a dramatic telling of the fall of Jerusalem in the year 70 A.D., which to me, that's probably the more bizarre one than the allegory one, because what happens at the end of the judgments in Revelation, Jesus Christ comes back. What did not happen after the destruction of Jerusalem in AD 70? Jesus did not come back, so you missed the whole climax of the story. So I just don't know how you could see that, even if you could think that some of the details fit, which I don't think you find that at all. Instead, I think we need to look at these judgments and take them as presented. But not only do we need to take them as presented, but we need to understand why they are occurring. And that's the purpose, especially of verses 9 through 11 of Revelation 6, the fifth seal judgment. And I think we see this in the sixth seal as well. And this sort of gives us the why to the purpose behind these judgments of the seals that will come about before the coming of Jesus Christ. So we're going to look at the purpose of these judgments, beginning to see that they're the answer to the prayers of God's people. So let's look now at Revelation 6, 9 through 11. When the Lamb broke the fifth seal, I saw underneath the altar the souls of those who had been slain because of the word of God, and because of the testimony which they had maintained. And they cried out with a loud voice, saying, How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth? And there was given to each of them a white robe, and they were told that they should rest for a little while longer, until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who had been killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. So with the breaking of the fifth seal, our perspective changes. We move from the judgments on earth to what is going on during this time in heaven. So we're back in the throne room of God, and our vision is specifically placed upon the altar that is before the throne. And there's two options that people have brought up as to what this altar can be. They if we believe that the temple has the image, the temple in heaven, God's throne room, reflects the temple or the tabernacle in the law, which the book of Hebrews tells us it does. There's two altars that it could be, and one is the main altar for burnt offerings, and the other is the altar of incense. The altar of incense is the smaller one that is on your right. And I think most likely this is pointing toward the altar of incense. And I think the purpose of this altar of incense is to show us that these cries that are being brought about by the martyrs, by those who lost their lives for Jesus Christ, these prayers are being brought to God himself. That's the purpose of this altar, and the incense is to show that their cries are ones that are making it straight to the Lord himself. So what we have here is a picture of God in his throne room, the altar of incense before him with the aroma coming before him. And what is the aroma that is coming from the altar? That aroma is not something smelling sweet or something that's physically burning, but that aroma is the cries and the prayers of the saints. And so what we read in here is that God in heaven, throughout the entire church age, which has lasted for the last 2,000 years, he has been hearing the prayers of those who have died on account of their faith in Jesus Christ and their testimony for him. And the prayer of the saints has been, "How long, O Lord, holy and true, will you refrain from judging and avenging our blood on those who dwell on the earth?" And I think this is crucial because I believe this provides us with the background information for these judgments. Why does God judge the world so harshly before the return of Jesus Christ? Why he does this is because this is the answer to the prayers of God's people who have been crying out for vengeance for the last 2,000 years. They've been praying, "How long? How long? Answer us," and God answers them. Now, this is a little bit difficult section, I think, for us in America today, especially because we've lived relatively at peace in America. But the people of God predominantly throughout the church age have not. I think it's rather humorous that the Western world today tries to pick Christians as these white European conquerors, because if you actually look throughout church history, Christians have not been conquering, but we've been conquered again and again and again. Christians have been fed to lions. They've been burned to dust as candles. They've been pierced by swords. They've been shot by guns, and more and more and more. If you want stories of these, you could read Fox's Book of Martyrs. You could read the story of Richard Wurmbrand to get the 20th century persecution that has come upon the church. We even have a more recent book called Faithful Disobedience that was just released at the end of last year, which tracks the suffering of the house church in China up until this day. And I just saw a news report today that they believe that there are more religious and political prisoners in China right now than possibly at any point in China's history. They've been upping the number of people that have been imprisoned for religious and political reasons. And so that persecution's going on to this very day. And so while it might seem off to us in our lives of relative peace to have people in glory praying, "How long until you will avenge us?" Well, an honest look at church history, the blood that has been spilled for the gospel, and it become very easy to understand why these cries for vengeance occurred. So then the answer is, why last week did we see a quarter of the world's population die by starvation, war, and wild animals? The answer is justice. It is justice and judgment from the prayers of God's people. Judgment from the persecution of God's people, looking back, for instance, on the Christians in North Africa. The Christians in North Africa for the first 400 years of church, well, first 600 years of church history. They might have had it the worst. They were continually persecuted during those days. Some of Rome's harshest persecutions took place in North Africa. And then finally, when Rome became Christianized, what happened very shortly after Rome became Christianized, and you could have freedom of religion in North Africa, but the Muslims came in and basically had a genocide of Christians in North Africa. And so while we at one time had thriving churches in that region of the world, Egypt, Libya, those countries and those areas, they had just been wiped off the face of the earth in persecution. And so that shows us a glimpse into these prayers and why they are occurring in heaven, and how these judgments at the end of the days are meant to be an answer to prayer to those saints. Then we read here that they are comforted with white robes. We're not certain what these white robes are. There's a lot of different options. They could just be a reward or an honoring for their sacrifice and their lifestyle. The interesting thing is that the most common picture of white robes in intertestamental Jewish writing is that white robes stood for a resurrected body. And so if you took the idea that at the beginning of the tribulation period, the saints were raptured up into heaven and given resurrected bodies at that point, this could be pointing toward that happening. Or white robes could also point toward the righteousness of Jesus Christ that is imputed upon these individuals. I think any of those three options could fit. It could point toward their new resurrected bodies in anticipation of them coming to earth, or a reward for their service and their sacrifice, or it could also just point toward the justification of Jesus Christ over them. But regardless of what the white robe is meant to be, the purpose of it is clear. The purpose is to comfort them. The purpose is God coming to them and saying, I hear your prayers. I will be just. I will make things right. So trust in who I am as you wait upon the return of Jesus Christ. And notice also that one of the things that God is waiting for before he sends Christ is until the number of their fellow servants and their brethren who were to be killed, even as they had been, would be completed also. So God is waiting for the full number of martyrs who will die on account of their faith to be brought into glory. So here's another one of those verses where we see a little bit about how God's sovereignty and God's lordship works. God's not some kind of puppet master in heaven controlling how everybody acts and what they do and all of their works, but God is working in the midst of the righteous, the good, and the sinful and wicked acts of man to accomplish his will. So one of the great examples we have of this is Joseph. His brother sold him into slavery for the purpose of making a quick buck and also getting rid of a younger brother who was just an annoying pest to them. But God was able to take their wicked action and then bring about a wonderful result in saving his people. And so we read as well, God has a time that he has planned out to send Jesus Christ. But that time isn't God looking into the future and saying, I'm going to send Jesus back on June 16th, 2023. But God's plan is to say, and I think we also see about people coming to the church in general, once a certain number of people get saved that God wants into his church, certain number of people die on account of their faith for Jesus Christ and they're martyred for him, once those numbers hit whatever God's plan and goal is, at that point he will send his son. So it's God making his plan and also taking into mind the actions and movements of those in the world to bring about the right time for Jesus to come in judgment. And now one final word on life in heaven as a result of the fifth seal. And I think this is very informative about how we should view heaven as the place where we go if we will die in this world before Christ comes back. And that is, I believe, that when we go to glory and when we're in heaven and we're there with Jesus and with our loved ones who have gone before, I do not think that we're going to get to heaven and we're going to be in this ideal bliss where we're going to say, I'm in heaven and I want nothing more than to be there forever. I think that when we're in heaven, Even more so than today, what we're going to long for in heaven is for the second coming of Jesus Christ and for us to come back to earth. I don't think until we get to heaven will we realize how much we were made for earth. God designed us for physical bodies. God designed us to run and jump and sing and craft and build things and to have grass between our toes and to pick apples and to do all that stuff that we love to do in this world. God made us to be physical beings. And when we're in heaven, we're going to be saying, I want to go back to this physical earth, but I want to do so with Jesus Christ. So I think the fifth seal is a real important one because I think it reveals to us a lot of things, and that is one, why God judges the world. It's not because he is this bitter, stomping deity who just gets angry in his wrath and does things to punish people with no purpose. But God is bringing this judgment because he is just, because he is righteous, because he is answering the cries of those who died on behalf of the name of his son, Jesus Christ. And also what's going to be happening is we're going to be coming back to this earth and the world in which we were made to live in and enjoy. So we get a lot of wonderful background information in the fifth seal. And then that brings us back to the sixth seal, which in some ways is the last of the seal. Excuse me, because the seventh seal just simply opens the trumpet judgments. So let's look now at seal 6 in Revelation chapter 6, verses 12 through 17. I looked when he broke the sixth seal, and there was a great earthquake, and the sun became black as sackcloth made of hair, and the whole moon became like blood, and the stars of the sky fell to the earth. As a fig tree casts its unripe figs when shaken by a great wind, the sky was split apart like a scroll when it is rolled up, and every mountain and island were moved out of their places. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and to the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? So what we see in the sixth seal is that the world itself, God's creation, turns upon man. And we should see how important this is from the grand narrative of Scripture. When God created Adam and Eve, what was the purpose that God made man for? Says it right in Genesis chapter 1. In Genesis 1:28, we read the purpose for the creating of man. God blessed them and said to them, be fruitful and multiply, and fill the earth and subdue it, and rule over the fish of the sea, and over the birds of the sky, and over every living thing that moves on the earth. So God says right here, here's the purpose of man and woman, Adam and Eve. Their first purpose is to make more copies of themselves so that we can have more men and women in this world. But then the second purpose of man is to be rulers of this planet, be rulers of the planet God has made as those who were made in God's image. So we're supposed to start at the very beginning with Adam and Eve caring for the garden, and then I think expanding the Garden of Eden and that situation and that care across the entire world. The whole world, I think, should ultimately be a Garden of Eden as a result of what Adam and Eve and their posterity would do for this world. But did Adam and Eve follow the commands that they were given? No, they failed in it. And we have failed in it generation after generation up to this very time. And so now in the seal judgments, the very world that we were created to rule is now rising in judgment against us. So to me, I see the significance of the sixth seal as meant to highlight our complete and total failure to rule this world as the stewards of the earth as we were intended to. We were to rule over this earth. But look at what instead is happening at the earth during this judgment. The earth is shaking, certainly toppling over the buildings that we painstakingly erected, bringing those buildings down like sand castles before the waves of the ocean. The sun and the moon which were meant to provide us light. They were meant to allow us to track our days. One of the purposes of the sun and moon and the stars in their creation was that they were supposed to help us bring order to our lives. And we see so many ways that the sun and moon and stars order our lives. I mean, we have our calendars designed around the movements of those bodies to this very day. But since we haven't ordered creation as we have intended to, while the stars in the sky are not going to help us anymore in our rulership of this world. Now they're going to assault us in darkness and blood. So we read here about stars falling from the sky. And like most scholars, we need to see these as meteors and not literal stars coming down from the heavens. One thing we also need to remember that from our perspective, we talk about stars and asteroids, but at the time of John, they just had stars, like all meteors, asteroids, they were all in the category of stars. Every celestial body was considered one of those. We still even use the same language today when we talk about a shooting star through the sky. So meteors would just fit in the category of stars falling from the sky. Although it is a little tough to say what is going on in verse 14, something will happen in the skies that will make it look like it's splitting apart. But I don't think we can really say what it might be. There's, a lot of guesses as far as what they can be. I don't find any of them to be all that convincing. And the more I thought about it, reading through the guesses and options that people have said, I was like, I mean, isn't there just a good chance that God's going to have some judgment happen during this time period that's just never happened before? Like something occurs that just has never occurred before in human history. We've never had that type of cataclysmic action in the world and up in the atmosphere. So, John's talking about something that he's never seen before, and we could never guess because maybe we've never seen it before. So I'm going to put this in that category. Something's going to happen in the skies that we've probably never seen before. Then the islands with mountains on them are moving from their places. And I agree with the most common view that these are physical disturbances that happened as a result of the great earthquake. And then one of the delayed reactions as a result of that earthquake is that you have volcanic eruptions on those islands. So do the volcanic eruptions cause the heavenly disturbance that's in the verse earlier? I don't think so. I even went and looked at a bunch of videos online of volcanoes erupting to see if any of them looked like it could be like a scroll parting the sky open and if anything could fit from that. And all the videos I looked at volcanic eruptions, I was like, that looks nothing like what you read in this book. Like I don't see how you could get that based on all the different volcanic eruptions that I saw there. And if what happens follows the order of this chapter, it's kind of interesting, the order. The order is you have an earthquake, so the ground shaking, and then you have heavenly disturbances that happen after that. And so I'm going to say, would there ever be a reason that the ground would shake and then it would cause disturbances in the sky? Like that just doesn't make any sense, that the two of those would go together, one followed after the other. And then after that, you'd have more stuff happening on the ground. And again, this is just a very odd order. It doesn't seem like these things should go together. And I think the reason this odd order happens, and I could be wrong on this, but my guess is the reason that you see earth and then sky and then back to earth again is that I think God is doing things where no one could say, oh, that's just a coincidence. Or, oh, this just happened because that happened, and then the natural result was that happened, and the natural result would happen. I think the order is meant to be, this is supernatural. This is not something that naturally occurs. You don't have earthquakes and then say, oh, look, the natural result of the earthquake is a meteor shower. Like I would guess a meteor shower would follow an earthquake. Those scientifically make sense together, and then it's capped off by some volcanic eruptions. I think the order and the timing of this seal is meant to drive a large population of the world, numbers of which we have never seen before, confess that what is occurring in this world is the work of God. I think this ordering of event is to make people turn and say, God's doing this. This is not natural. This is not normal. This is the judgment of God. And the reason I say that is because it looks like that is what the result of all that is. Because what happens after the stuff in the sky with the meteors falling and the earthquakes and the volcanoes, what happens is we read this. Then the kings of the earth and the great men and the commanders and the rich and the strong and every slave and free man hid themselves in the caves and among the rocks of the mountains. And they said to the mountains and the rocks, fall on us and hide us from the presence of, who are they giving credit for? Him who sits on the throne, and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? I think the great tragedy of these verses is that one thing we know because of the tribulation period, as a result of this time period, one thing that's going to happen is you're going to have 144,000 Israelites believe that Jesus is their Messiah because of all that happens on this time period. So what could happen when the kings and the great men of the world, down to the slaves and the free men who are probably just day laborers and impoverished, what would happen if they turned to God for forgiveness in this moment of devastation? God would forgive them. They would believe that they would enter the kingdom. God would welcome them into the family if they would simply receive and believe in Jesus Christ. But instead of believing in Jesus Christ, we get one of the more tragic turns in the Bible. Instead of seeing this clear demonstration saying, I see that the Creator is having the creation turn against us who've been made in His image. We're being judged by God. Not only they're saying they're being judged by God, but I believe they're using the phrase wrath of the Lamb as a way of saying they're tying this to the Christian God of Scriptures. And they know Jesus is His Son and His Lamb. And instead of turning to Him in forgiveness, they're saying, we just want to be hidden from this judgment. We don't want to believe in God. We just don't want to be killed by Him. We don't want to trust in the Lamb. We just don't want His wrath to fall upon us. And then they have this kind of odd wording where they want the rocks and the mountains to fall on them and hide them. And this is just bizarre kind of wording, because if a giant rock falls on you, it's not going to hide you. It's going to end your life and kill you. So this kind of question here, like, are they hoping for suicide? Is this people who are saying, I want the rocks to fall on me and kill me so I can die because I don't want to live through this anymore? Or are they looking to hide in mountains and they want the rocks to fall and maybe cover the entrance? It's tough to say what they're really looking to do. They're probably not thinking all this that clearly at this time period in their life. When they're trying to hide from God's judgment, their mental capacities probably aren't firing the best at this moment, which is probably why it's a little odd. But regardless, I think the key line for us when it comes to these sealed judgments comes from these people who are hiding from God. When we read, hide us from the presence of Him who sits on the throne and from the wrath of the Lamb. For the great day of their wrath has come, and who is able to stand? And this is the great line of this chapter to really give us the purpose and explain it. And that is, who brought this wrath upon the earth that is happening with the sealed judgments? Is this the wrath of man? Is this the wrath of the Antichrist? No, this is the wrath and judgment of God. This is the great day of wrath that has become. And let's be honest, how little of what has occurred in this chapter could said to be the natural results of the actions of man at all. I mean, I guess you could argue that the first sealed judgment with the conqueror, obviously, that's a man. The second one with war, with men rising up against man, that could be a result of them. But all the other seals after that, seal 3, 4, 5 in heaven, obviously, and 6. Those are all the works of God. This is clearly what God is doing. So these seals are coming from God's own hand. They are the judgment of Jesus Christ. When you have all these things in order, famine, disease, wild animals, earthquakes, meteors, volcanic eruptions, Unless you're someone who believes that the superheroes of superhero movies can really do what they claim to do in the movies in real life, or you believe that meteorologists, instead of describing the weather, can begin to set the weather, it's clear that all these judgments are coming from God. And they're not just coming from God, but they are the wrath of the Lamb. So whose judgment is this? This is the judgment of Jesus Christ. And to be frank, when you start reading this book, you should be prepared that if there's judgment in this book, who is the judgment going to come from? It's going to come from Jesus. Because whose book is this? This is the revelation of Jesus Christ. And I took the very beginning of this book. The reason it's called that is because, one, it's the revelation owned by Jesus. Two, it's the revelation about Jesus. And then when we have these seal ready to be opened to learn about this message, we learn who's the only one that can open the seal. It's Jesus. This is his revelation. This is his judgment. So this is not the wrath of man. This is not the judgment of the Antichrist. This is the revelation and judgment of Jesus Christ. And one other thing I'd like you to consider before we end, and that is, I believe the second coming of Jesus Christ, the return of Jesus, begins with the rapture of the saints at the beginning of the tribulation. And then the return of Jesus continues all the way until his second coming. I believe the second coming is one event that spans a 7-year period from Revelation chapter 6 to Revelation chapter 19. It's a 7-year long event. There are lots of parts, lots of components to it, but I believe we should take it as one singular event. So when someone talks about the second coming of Christ, someone talks about the return of Jesus, it includes everything from the rapture to the tribulation period to his coming to this earth and establishing his kingdom. And I believe there's a lot of biblical precedents for this. For example, let's take the Exodus of Egypt. The Jews' Exodus of Egypt was a single event. But how long did that single event of the Exodus of Egypt take place? I think at minimum, you would say the Exodus took place over a period of probably 3 to 4 months at the least, because you'd have to start it with the call of Moses all the way to the parting of the Red Sea. So that's a number of months period of time. And if we think from Moses' call and then his journey to Egypt, all of the plagues, you're probably talking a minimum of a year for the Exodus. But if you're going to take the Exodus from when God calls Moses to deliver the Jews all the way until they make the promised land, how long is the Exodus? It's a 40-year period of time for that singular event. And I think there's other things that we have in the Bible that happen that take place over a long period of time, but it's continued a singular event. I would even say Jesus' first coming was one event, but it took place for the 30-plus years of his lifetime. So to talk about the second coming of Jesus Christ, I think it's a 7-year time period that begins with the rapture, that ends with his second coming. I think one of the reasons that there's confusion in the church so often about the rapture and if it comes before the tribulation. Some people say in the middle. Some people say right before he comes back. Other people say the second coming and the rapture are the same event. And there's lots of issues about when it happens. I think part of that is because all of this is one singular event that we would call the second coming of Jesus Christ. If you remember, whenever the second coming is described in the minor prophets, what's a main part of the second coming? It's not just talking about the Messiah coming and ruling, but a main part of the second coming passages talk about the destruction and the mayhem that will happen before he comes. And it's always pictured as one singular event in the prophets. So I think when we look at the situation with the second coming of Jesus Christ, it's all one event from Revelation 6 to Revelation 19. And I believe it starts with the taking of the saints to glory, and then it ends with Jesus coming and establishing his kingdom on earth. So, and I think the book of Revelation points to this. Revelation is the revealing of Jesus Christ, and we're talking about these judgments here, even though Jesus hasn't come and actually physically revealed himself on earth, but the revelation is already occurring. So I believe we're already talking about the second coming of Jesus Christ here. And so I think that's why, though, we do have some confusion in the churches, because this is a big, long 7-year event, and not there's an event of the rapture, and then an event of these judgments, and then an event of the second coming. But all of this is considered the second coming in Scripture. And if we're taking this as a 7-year tribulation period, and we're going to take the events all in chronological order, one occurring after the next, which is how I take it. At this point, at the end of the first 6 seals, we're probably about 2 years, close to 2 years into that 7-year period. And we got 5 more years to go. But before we get to the trumpet judgments, we'll have a little bit of a break by looking at some other things that are going to be going on during this time period.